With Regulation G well underway, today we are going to be looking at some of the top cores in the game right now. We're going to focus specifically on one core for each of the top restricteds, and we're going to start this list off with Caly-X Ice Rider. And Caly-X Ice Rider, its main thing that it has going for it, has actually been a core that's been around since 2022 as well. And I think it really loves having Incineroar and Amoonguss. This, by far to me, is going to be your best core. The third place team at Indianapolis, the fourth place team at Indianapolis, and a bunch of others followed suit with this core. This core is so strong because you get the ability to get the Intimidate off with your Incineroar. You get the ability to click Fake Out and set up Trick Room. You get the ability to Parting Shot to start hindering away from your opponent's ability to actually hit Calyrex, which it already has incredible bulk. You don't really need more. You get to potentially burn other Calyrexes. You get to taunt anything that might want to taunt you, right? Incineroar is really strong. Then you get the Amoonguss on here, and you get to go Pollen Puff, which I think is one of the big options here. That's a little underrated. And yeah, you have Pollen Puff and you heal your partner, but when you can heal a Calyrex with the stats of 100, 150, 130 in its defenses, it goes to show you just how crazy Pollen Puff is, because you're getting a full 50% back. If they start chipping down this Calyrex and now all of a sudden they're in Trick Room, all of a sudden you can just Pollen Puff, right? You also get Redirection, so now you get Redirection plus the ability to set Trick Room with your Calyrex. You also get the option to Spore to buy your Calyrex more turns if needed. And on top of that, I mean, you can do a few other things here. You can go with like a Clear Smog, you can go with a Protect. But for right now, we'll go basic. I don't know if Protect is the option here, but you can definitely go ahead and do that. Kind of like you can Protect the Amoonguss, get into Trick Room, and then you're in Trick Room and you can start sporing things. I think that's a pretty consistent option for the Amoonguss here, right? And just the core of 3 is absolutely disgusting. Obviously, we have incredible Glacial Lance coverage, right? Incineroar does not like the ground types. Okay, ground types, goodbye. The biggest concern with this core right now is actually the Kyogres that are running around. Kyogre seems to be what's breaking this core, so a lot of these Calyrex and Amoonguss teams end up throwing on a Raging Bolt. I like sticking to cores of 3 Pokemon, but Raging Bolt probably is one of your next additions on here just to help deal with those Kyogre teams as a whole. But overall, this core is absolutely disgusting, okay? And then you get your Trick Room on yourself. Like, you get to be a Trick Room sweeper that can set Trick Room, and you just don't need to set it either, right? You can easily just out-bulk opponents and out-attack opponents without even needing to get Trick Room up with this core of 3. Calyrex plus Incineroar. Calyrex takes a couple hits, gets a Glacial Lance off, removes something that maybe they expected you to set Trick Room. All of a sudden, now you get a kill. Now you have Calyrex. Then you can Protect, get an Amoonguss, redirect. Calyrex goes off, and Trick Room's never hit the board. You've got 2 to 3 kills already, and you're winning the game, right? That's what I like about this core so much. It is a hard Trick Room core, yes, because you have the ability to go Fake Out Trick Room, Redirection Trick Room, right? But you also just have the ability, because of Calyrex's bulk now, to just say, well, I'm not going to set Trick Room. I'm going to function as a balance team. And if I feel the need to set Trick Room, if I think they are overwhelming me offensively, then I can get the Trick Room up. Then I can pressure for the Trick Room, right? And I think that's what makes this core really good and takes it to that next level, because this core has been around for forever. Back in 2022, we saw this exact same core with a Palkia added on. Obviously, we cannot do that right now, right? But however, we're going to still add that Dragon type in Raging Bolt here more often than not right now. And I think the core itself is very strong. You'd also see a Tapu Fini. Unfortunately, we can't do that. I mean, you could put a Weezing there. But once again, these 3 make such a strong core on their own. You could probably put realistically anything that kind of makes the slightest bit of sense beside them, and you are going to see wins. This is one of the top restricted into formats, paired with 2 of the best support pieces into format. It is going to be good. It is going to work very well, especially if you can find a strong way to close it out. So our next core is actually going to be Koraidon. I wanted to jump over Koraidon because it didn't have a very strong showing in Indianapolis. However, I still think Koraidon is very strong. And I think Koraidon, Raging Bolt plus Flutter Mane is incredible, right? If you just have a Koraidon and a Raging Bolt on their own, you are doing very well into any opposing weather team that may pop up. If you play a Kyogre, you have a Raging Bolt for that, and a Koraidon that can switch in very safely. If you're playing against a Pelipper, the Raging Bolt puts immense amount of pressure on that Pelipper, and a lot of players were using the Pelipper to say, hey, we're going to make sure you're not really doing much with your Koraidon. We're going to get you out of the weather. But now I'm forced to bring my Pelipper into this, and then there's a Raging Bolt. So now I have a Pelipper staring down a Raging Bolt, and that's never going to work. Raging Bolt will always win that 1v1 and always put pressure onto the Pelipper slot, which really helps Koraidon out because it allows you to get that weather control a little bit easier, right? Like Pelipper hits the board, you have Koraidon on the board, and Raging Bolt hits the board. You know, you get Raging Bolt on the field, you pressure off the Pelipper, and all of a sudden now the Pelipper has to make a decision. It can try to stay in and get an attack off because it's in the rain right now, or it has to switch out. And if it has to switch out, then you can once again read that with your other slot. You put on immense amount of pressure as well. And I think the other concept on this core is actually going to be the Fluttermane. Fluttermane is a Pokemon that's fallen off in usage, but it's a Pokemon that is still incredibly, incredibly strong. Once again, you get the weather set up for yourself, so you get that photosynthesis boost. And I would imagine you want to go speed on here, right? You would want that speed boost. I'm going to go ahead and put timid just for the sake of it. I'll throw something like this, right? You want that speed boost, right, when that sun is active. Being able to outpace the Calyrex Shadow in the sun, dropping a big Shadow Ball into it, then just dropping Dazzling Gleams and Moonblast. We've all seen a Fluttermane do Fluttermane things from Reg C to Reg, I don't know, to whatever Reg we're in now. I guess Regulation D, right? We've seen this Pokemon dominate formats, and we will see this Pokemon continue to dominate formats. I mean, you probably throw an Incineroar and a Grass type on this core as well, but I wanted to focus on something that wasn't Incineroar or Amoonguss, since that is one of the best cores defensively in the game. Wanted to open up the slot here. And on Koraidon, yes, it's a little bit of sun abuse, but all of these Pokemon function without the sun. We've seen a ton of Raging Bolt without sun over the last few months, right? We've seen Fluttermane dominate formats, and we don't need the sun. But now that we can have the sun in a very strong option with our restricted in Koraidon, it feels incredible, right? Now, obviously, we've seen top players pilot these teams to success, like Michael Derbest. I believe Luca got top 16 at Indianapolis, but I'm not sure if they actually how they actually closed the core out, if they closed it out this way or not. But regardless, I do think Koraidon Raging Bolt Fluttermane is the strongest option, and then you just close this out with good stuffs, right? You close this out with things you think you may not be able to hit, so you cover your lines that way, and it's just really strong. Like, there's nothing else to say. I was gonna sit here and say it was really strong again, but the fact of the matter is you get your electric type attacks. The weird thing here is a little bit of double dragon, but the only fairy in the format right now is pretty much Fluttermane, and you put on immense amount of pressure just by simply having your own Fluttermane as well. Raging Bolt is disgusting. More often than not, you're going to see this with an Assault Vest. You get your special attack boost from the Photosynthesis, putting on massive pressure into the other board, and then Koraidon is an Incineroar, delete button, rocking that clear amulet, similar to the Calyrex Ice. Just overall, this core is really strong, and what I like the most about it is, like I said before, it's that sun core, and you're abusing the sun without the requirement to abuse the sun. If you don't have sun on the field for Raging Bolt or Fluttermane, it doesn't really matter all that much. Would you like it? Yes, but you don't need it, right? And because it's not a necessity, I think that's what makes it so strong, is a lot of the times, you know, you're going against a weather team, and it's like, okay, we shut down their weather, we win weather control, we're fine. All of a sudden, you win the weather control here, and you're like, huh, Raging Bolt still hits incredibly hard. Fluttermane is still disgusting. And even Koraidon, obviously not hitting nearly as hard, is still a fast enough piece to put pressure onto the board. I think the core 3 is really, really strong. I think what we haven't seen with Koraidon yet is the full-on correct team for it. I don't think we've found the correct Koraidon team yet. And I think as the meta develops, I think this is kind of the direction I would lean with Koraidon. Okay, Terapagos time. Now, normally, if I would have made this video 2 weeks ago, this would have been Terapagos, Incineroar, Amoonguss, right? This is what this core would have been. However, we have discovered, I don't want to say we have discovered, but we've come up with a way, and it's leaning towards a more offensive Terapagos, being the better Terapagos. Both of the Terapagos in top 8 of Indianapolis were choice specs variances, and the one in top 16, I believe, was Power Herb. So there is a lot of strong offensive options from Terapagos right now. So that's where we're going to focus this core right now. I do think the choice specs variant is a tad bit better. It just covers more options. Now, The one way I look at this is Terapagos is very, very strong. You are allowed to play that defensive game. You are allowed to play it very similar to the old school Zygarde cores, where you're going to set up a little bit and then you're going to dish out your damage, and that is very strong. However, that becomes a little bit linear. The choice specs variant is something I don't think a lot of people had on their radars going into Indy, right? And I think what we've seen from a lot of them is actually Chi-Yu and Tornadus. In this case, just Tailwind in general, but I think why not run a Tornadus? You also get weather control that way as well. Now, I think this is the core. If you're running offensive Terapagos, this, in my opinion, is the core. You get the Chi-Yu to boost your Terra Starstorms, right? And that just on its own is disgusting. You get the Tornadus to have the Bleakwind Storm to be able to hit those fighting types that would normally pressure down Terapagos. You do have a little bit of a fighting weakness still between the Chi-Yu and the Terap, but you can patch that in your other 3 Pokemon, right? So I'm not too worried about that. And overall, what you're trying to do here is you're trying to make this Terapagos go, right? And you're gonna run specs on this more often than not, right? And there's a few options, right? You go Earth Power. I mean, I think Sleep Talk is becoming one of the more popular options as well. And then you have options here. I know the team that got second place had Hyper Beam in this case, which was basically just a delete button, right? You also have Dark Pulse. You have Meteor Beam if you really wanted to. I mean, you could technically go Aura Sphere. You do get some cool options, right? But I think something along these lines is pretty solid as in terms of what I would want from my Terapagos here, especially on a choice specs variant. And what you're going to do is you're basically just going to send damage. Obviously, this is the tiny version. So now we've got Terapagos Stellar. Now we've got these stats right here for us, right? And the concept is you are now putting out pressure. And why this worked, I think, so well in Indianapolis is because the players that were there were expecting the Terapagos teams, more often the Terapagos teams, to be clicking the Calm Minds beside the fake out cycles, running those leftovers. So they would have a few turns to get themselves into position. And just kind of the game plan there would be to mitigate the Terapagos, don't let it get set up. I can cycle around for a few turns and then I can sweep, right? And then I can just deal with it later on. However, this more offensive form of Terapagos, rocking that Chi-Yu, rocking the speed control, right? It allows Terapagos to go immediately. And I think that was a big shift in the matchup game plans versus a lot of the Terapagos teams. Like, I know myself, I was not going to be ready had I played an offensive Terapagos variant. Now, I probably would have found my way through it. However, the fact of just the immediate damage output that you get from running Specs Terapagos Chi-Yu, or even having a late game Terapagos where everybody's ready, expecting Terapagos to be hitting the field immediately and then set up and then go crazy. But if Terapagos is in the end game, you don't tear anything. You get a bunch of chip on everything. Terapagos comes in late game, all of a sudden just immediate Terra Starstorm, and sends massive damage, right? I think something like that is very strong from an offensive mindset of Terapagos. And I think the offensive ones tend to be a little bit more threatening up front. However, I do want to consider the fact that, yes, the bulkier Terapagos I think are still around, but I like this variant of Terapagos. It is no longer saying Terapagos is linear, and I like the concept of having the specs on it and just use my restricted for massive damage immediately. I like that concept a lot. Okay, everybody's favorite blue whale. Now, the concept here is everybody was saying Kyogre was washed. Kyogre wasn't good. Kyogre was gone. Going into Indianapolis, I mean, I think we all expected to see a fair chunk, but I don't think we expected it to make up 11% of the board, right? And you're honestly going to get Kyogre, Zarina, and you're going to go Tailwind, right? Whether this Tailwind ends up being Iron Jugulus like the top 8 placing team, whether it ends up being a Tornadus like you just have seen time and time again, format after format, right? Kyogre Tornadus is absolutely disgusting. However, the core in general here is Kyogre, Serena plus Tailwind. What you want to put in this Tailwind slot is completely up to you. Whether it's a Jugulus, which I think is very, very cool, has a lot of options, right? However, I think Torn just seems to be a little bit more consistent and generally has been the most consistent Tailwind setter beside Kyogre for the longest amount of time. You know, Torn Ogre, it's been a thing for years. Right? It's been a thing for, I think, 3-4 formats now when there's GS Cup available. So why not run it back? Right? So the concept here, I'm going to spend a lot more of this time talking about the Serena on this team than anything else because we've seen Torn Ogre dominate formats in the past. But I want to talk about Serena. Generally speaking, you're going to see a wide lens or a loaded dice here. you're going to see the grass type move, generally going to be Power Whip, generally going to see a triple axle, and you're going to probably see a protect and probably some other tech move, right? This is probably what you're going to see, whether this be like a taunt, whether this be a, do you get helping hand still? You do get helping hand still, right? Whether it be something along those lines, probably looking at a supportive move. Power Whip triple axle is incredible, incredible coverage. And the concept here is, beside Kyogre, having a grass type put on pressure onto the dragon types as well is amazing. So Water Spout plus triple axle, gonna do a massive chunk of damage. If you get into Tailwind, or if you have the faster pieces with Kyogre, Serena, there's not a lot that anybody can really do to get out of this scenario, right? The Raging Bolt does not appreciate taking a triple axle. It cannot thunderclap your Kyogre. You are doing massive damage with a Water Spout. Yeah, you're probably only doing about 25 to 30 because it's an AV Raging Bolt, but that's where the triple axle comes in and finishes it off. If you force the Terra out of the Raging Bolt, then the Raging Bolt no longer is no longer resisting your Water Spout, and you're doing massive damage that way. One cool thing we saw actually on stream was John Zoo's team on the Groudon team there. His Raging Bolt was actually Terra Water, and that actually allowed him to go for the survival of the Water Spout into triple axle. However, then you just read that and you potentially click Power Up, right? So there's some cool ways to do it, but the fact of the matter is it is very tough to get out of the water grass of Serena, especially when there's a triple axle on it as well. I think the concept here is incredible. You're blocking priority with the Queenly Majesty as well, meaning you can't get Thunderclap, you can't get Grassy Glided, right? You probably put a more defensive Kyogre on the board. I think Grass has been the go-to defensive Kyogre. Then you can go ahead and go Mystic Water, you can go Assault Vest, you can go Leftovers Combine. You have tons of options on this Kyogre right now, right? And the concept is get to spots where Kyogre can click Water Spout, get to spots where they can't really resist the Water Spout, right? Whether that's you're going to send Tailwind Water Spout, whether you're going to send Serena plus Kyogre and do massive damage. I mean, in theory, you could go Choice Scarf here as well. I'm not a huge fan of the Choice Scarf variant. It feels a little bit, I don't like being locked into my one move. I like having options on my Kyogre, right? Like if I have Water Spout and I take 90% immediately and I'm Scarfed, then I have to switch out or I'm doing no damage. I like the ability for Kyogre to be able to cycle around its moves after it takes some damage now. Say, oh, I took some damage, well, let's launch off a 110 base power Origin Pulse spread move instead. I think the concept is really, really good. You shut down the priority like I was saying. You get your speed control. This Cora 3 is incredible. And the triple axle just makes it so much better. I do want to talk quickly about loaded dice because I think this is something that not a lot of people talk about, but in game on triple axle, when you are holding a loaded dice, if you connect the first triple axle, all three of your triple axles will connect. Loaded dice allows the accuracy check to only happen once when you're running triple axle, which is very, very cool. It's a little weird. If you do go loaded dice, you're probably going to go Bullet Seed over here as well, right? You're going to get 4 to 5 hits from the Bullet Seed, which is a base 100 move, always consistently. That's pretty strong. And then you're always going to connect your triple axles after you hit the first one. Now, granted, it's a little bit lower. Instead of needing a 99, 99, 99, you do need to get just 190. So technically it's similar, but like, it's a cool concept as well. I really did want to point out that having the loaded dice just kind of allows you to have that triple axle. All you need to do is connect the first one. All three are going to connect. And that is very nice in a terms of, you know, sometimes you hit two and it's like, oh, I missed the third one, you know, and it's very sad. So once you connect the first one, you're always going to guarantee that if you have the loaded dice. Something very cool. I don't know how consistent that really is in comparison to like wide lens, but I think overall the concept of Serena is a very, very strong one, and I really wanted to touch upon the loaded dice variant as well. All right, everybody's favorite restricted Calyrex Shadow. This is the S tier restricted in the format. However, it performed very modestly at Indianapolis. There were no Calyrex Shadow in the top 16, but what you are seeing beside this Calyrex core right now is Incineroar, and more often than not, the Urshifu Water. This to me is the core to beat. If you're looking at either running Calyrex, I would recommend running these. If you're looking at breaking it, I would look into how do I break these three in general, right? And you just get a lot, right? Incineroar, we all know what Incineroar does. We all have seen Incineroar beside Urshifu in the past, and this is basically fake out. Surging Strikes is incredible. Fire and Water core is really, really good. You tend to see these opt for like a Choice Scarf variant, unless there is like a Tailwind somewhere else on the team. And then the Calyrex, you tend to see a Focus Sash, a Spell Tag, a Life Orb, right? Just something to put on a lot more pressure. right? And Calyrex, and I know I said put on a lot more pressure. Focus Sash doesn't really put on pressure, but what it allows you to do is, in theory, by living an extra turn on the field, you are putting on more pressure, is where I'm getting at with that statement, right? And then you're going to run your Astral Barrage, you're going to run your Psychic. Now, like I said, it did not perform well in Indianapolis. Yes, it was pretty strong in like day 2. It was good into top 32s. It had a lot of top 32s, didn't actually sneak into top 16. And what I'm going to amount this to is that Calyrex was the top restricted going into the format. If you looked at anybody's tier list going into Indianapolis, Calyrex Shadow was the top of that list. There is nothing stopping Calyrex Shadow from being at the top of that list. It was constantly the top of that list. I don't think I ever saw anybody put a different Pokemon above it. Now, it might have happened, but if it did, it was very, very rare. Now, it's just such a good restricted, and I think because everybody was so hyped up about it, everybody brought their counters to it. Right, we had Terra Dark Amoonguses everywhere. Right, we had the Assault Vest on a lot of Pokemon. We had the Choice Scarf Urshifu into Rain that was gonna remove the Calyrex. Right, everybody had their answers to Calyrex. Obviously, it still performed decently well because it's a Calyrex Shadow. Right, it just didn't get to that next level because everybody knew their matchup. So Calyrex, what I'm looking for is now, how is Calyrex going to adapt now that it's seen a regional where it knows how people are trying to beat it now, right? I still like the Calyrex Instant Urshifu. This was the common core. This is the common core. I still like this core. Where you go from here is the question. Now, the question is, if people are starting to counter other restricteds as well, since Calyrex had a bad performance, are we really going to need to change the Calyrex teams? Or are they just going to naturally become better because people are going to start dropping their answers to them in order to fix other matchups like Miraidon, right? So because of that, maybe we don't need to change the Calyrex teams. However, this core right here with the Calyrex, the Instant, the Urshifu is incredibly, incredibly strong. You get fake out support. Calyrex just, it's disgusting, right? There's not much else to say other than Astral Barrage go burr, right? Like, you get Astral Barrage going, you get one KO, and all of a sudden the game is in your favor. You're pretty much not losing unless they get like Tailwind support in the back, right? If you play Calyrex well, you are winning a lot of games just inherently just from running Calyrex on its own. Incineroar is very, very strong beside it. It helps beat the opposing Calyrex, gives you fake out pressure onto things that may threaten Calyrex, and then just naturally you pair that with like a Choice Scarf Urshifu. Like I said, we've seen fake out plus Urshifu do numerous things time and time again. It's had success in the format, and there's tons of ways you can close this out. You throw a grass type on here, maybe it's an Amoonguss, maybe it's a Rillaboom. Then you add maybe a Tailwind if you feel a need to have a Tailwind. Maybe it's a Tornadus, maybe it's a Whimsicott, right? There's ways to close this out properly. And this is kind of the core I would start with the Calyrex. This is where the Calyrexes tend to build. If you're looking at top placing Calyrex teams, they tend to have the Caly Instant Urshifu core. And that's kind of what I'm trying to highlight in this video with all these cores. Miraidon. Now, there's not a lot to say about Miraidon here. It just won the regional and got top 8. So, of course, this core that I'm coming up with is going to basically be based off of those two teams, or heavily weighted off of those two teams. And this is going to be Giraffe, which I need to do actually type Farigiraf. Typing is hard. We can get the Farigiraf in here. And I am saying we want Tailwind beside this. I'm going to put Tornadus here, but I'm going to go back and change it in a second. It is not Tornadus on this core, but I wanted to just put Tailwind here in general for right now. It is actually going to be a Whimsicott, okay? And I think Whimsicott is 20 times better on these cores than Tornadus is. And my main reasoning for Whimsicott being better here is that Raging Bolt is one of the biggest issues for Miraidon. Assault Vest, Raging Bolt, Miraidon has a lot of trouble removing immediately because we've seen this Pokemon. If you watched any of the stream, right, we've seen this Pokemon absolutely be a delete button. Amoonguss takes like 80% from Terra Electric Electro Drift, right? Then you pair this with something like a Discharge, so you have options to hit everything. You hit the whole board if you need to. Then you just click like Draco Meteor and probably just Volt Switch to cycle around, right? I think that was actually the winning set as well. But the concept here is you're basically going to drop you're a delete button. You are going to delete anything that doesn't resist you, and probably some things that just resist you anyways. If you go Terra Electric, blow them up. Electric is an incredibly defensive typing. You only have one weakness, and that is ground, and there is not a lot of ground Pokemon in the board right now. especially with all the Pelipper and the Kyogre. You know, Landorus doesn't want to be here anymore. Landorus doesn't really hold up in this format as much as it held up in like the regulation Fs. So you automatically lose one big ground type there. Then your other ground types are kind of refined to the Ursalunas, which you probably just drop a Draco and remove anyways, right? And there's not many other ground types outside of maybe a Groudon. Now, does Groudon see more usage now that Miraidon won the regional? That's an option, right? However, what I really want to focus on is this Miraidon Giraffe Whimsicott core. Miraidon is fast, it hits hard, and Farigiraf allows them to do that. Right, we saw both the winning team and the top 8 placing team have Electric Seed here, which I think was very, very cool and something I hadn't really considered. I'm not going to put it in, just to let you know that is a concept here. And the concept was you not only get a defense boost, but you also get to take less damage from knockoff because you've already consumed your item. So overall, you're sitting around on the field really, really bulky. And then you just sit there with Foul Play. You've got the immediate defense boost into the Calyrex into the Calyrex Ice Riders, right? And it feels incredible, right? You're also stopping priority into your max speed spec thing. So if they're trying to fake you out to get through you, they're not going to be able to do that anymore. And I say Whimsicott is the better Tailwind user here, strictly because of the Raging Bolt, right? Tornadus loses to Raging Bolt. It will always lose to Raging Bolt. However, Whimsicott gives you a chance. Whimsicott has some cool options, right? You tend to go Focus Sash on this piece, right? And what you're going to see here is you're going to get Moonblast. And I think the offensive fairy coverage for this team is amazing, right? It starts putting a little bit more pressure onto things like the Raging Bolt. You get the fact that maybe they try to protect out of your Miraidon, and all of a sudden they just protected. Well, boom, they're going to get Encored into Protect. Or you're going to Encore them. Like the Raging Bolt's going to click maybe like, I don't know, like a Thunderclap. Okay, I'm going to Encore them into Thunderclap, and now their Farigiraf is going to switch into the board, and they won't be able to do anything for 3-4 turns, right? You just get the ability to do that, and Whimsicott gives you what that and Tornadus does not. Tornadus gives you Tailwind, yes. Whimsicott gives you Tailwind, yes. Whimsicott allows you more tools to play around the Raging Bolts and to play around other things, in my opinion, that would normally, in general, counter Miraidon. So I think having a Whimsicott on this core is incredibly, incredibly strong. And I think it just pairs really, really well. I think this is the core of 3 that you're going to see as the development of Miraidon as the format develops, as the Miraidon teams develop as well, right? You're going to see Miraidon teams develop. They're not just going to sit there and run the same things constantly. But I think this is a really, really strong core of 3 for Miraidon moving forward. And obviously it won a regional and got top 8 at the regional, so something was clearly good about it. But I think these are the 3 that are going to stick around. If they're going to make adaptations, I think it's like the Ursaluna slots that are going to be modified. I think this is the core of 3 from that team that I'm really comfortable saying is going to be sticking around, especially if you're really trying to force a Tailwind on it. Whimsicott is the better Tailwind setter for Miraidon. Last but not least, Zamazenta. And Zamazenta really appreciates having Incineroar and a bulky grass type. Whether this is Rillaboom or whether this is Amoonguss, I think both cases can be made for both. I saw actually a lot of Zamazenta teams have a more offensive Rillaboom. I myself played against a Clear Amulet one, and I believe the one that got top 8 was actually Choice Banded Rillaboom. So the more offensive Rillaboom on these teams is kind of surprising as well. I do still think that a bulky grass type here is correct, and I would generally lean towards an Assault Vest here. However, maybe you're bulky enough without the AV and you have the AV somewhere else, and grass type in general is pretty strong. Right. However, I don't know if it's me and I had a grass type somewhere else, I would just like throw a Amoonguss on the board instead. But what I like about Rillaboom is it gives you that damage output, right? Because if I just do this and I have my Amoonguss here, my Amoonguss, I'm basically saying I am committing to setting up the Zamazenta, right? I'm committing a little bit more. I'm becoming I'm becoming a little more passive on the rest of the team, and I'm saying I'm going to let Zamazenta do the bulk of the work, which is fine. However, sometimes you do need to get that more offensive option, and Rillaboom is that more offensive option in this slot, right? So I think one of the two, depending on how you want to approach the team, is definitely the way to go. We've seen Incineroar time and time again on this list. It is a 70% usage mon for a reason. It gives you so much value, the ability to fake out, knock off items, parting shot, cycle around, maybe click Taunt into opposing Incineroars that are trying to click Will-O-Wisp into your Zamazenta, right? It is such a glue to the format right now. It patches a lot of restricted bad matchups. It helps versus other restricteds. It is a 70% usage mon for a reason. It could have been on every single one of these cores that I had mentioned today, and I probably could have justified it. But I'm not going to do that. I did want to feature it here, though, because I do think Zamazenta really does appreciate Incineroar, Zamazenta, bulky-ish grass type here. Once again, this just depends on how often you want to go here. How offensive do you want to be? Do you want to be a little bit more passive and set up the Zammy, or do you want to have the ability to kind of get that passive healing with the grassy terrain and then just put on a little bit more pressure with the Rillaboom? Maybe remove the Urshifus a little bit sooner, right? Overall, the core is really, really strong. You get to go fake it. You get to go immediate body press. If you run taunt on the instant, you get to cover for that as well. If you go Amoonguss, you get to pollen puff up your Zamazenta, which I think is something that's a little bit overlooked right now because Zamazenta is very bulky piece, right? 92, 140, 140, right? You're not dying very easily. So similar to that Calyrex where you're able to just take like 30, 40%, heal yourself back up. All of a sudden, they've done nothing to you and you've done massive damage with your body presses, right? I think these cores are really, really strong. Zamazenta Instant Amoonguss is incredible. And with that, guys, we are going to wrap up the video here. I kind of sped it up on the Zamazenta, but there's not much else to say, right? We've talked about Instant Amoonguss before. We've talked about how it cycles for the restricted. It just enables Zamazenta that much better, right? So we're going to wrap up the video here, guys. Once again, these cores are just ideas. They are concepts. They are what we are commonly seeing right now. I'm not saying you have to use these cores if you want to see success with these Pokemon. But I am saying it's a very good starting spot if you are trying to build from the core yourself, or if you're trying to look at, okay, how am I going to approaching my matchups here? How am I going to approach my Zammy matchup? How am I going to approach my Caly-I matchup, right? I'm not going to approach my Caly-I matchup if I just lose to Instant Amoonguss, so I can make sure that I have those covered as well, right? Kind of giving you the ideas, seeing what's out there, seeing what's common. These are the common cores, or what I believe to be the top cores for the top restricteds in the format. If you are enjoying this type of content, please feel free to leave a like and subscribe. It really does help out the channel. But with that, I'm going to get on out of here. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will catch you all in a future video.